Stacy had to appear in court after a trial period for her adoption. She had lived with her new foster parents for about 3 months. Stacy was glad that she finally could come to court. This was finally the time to get everything off her chest. The judge was very reserved. The parents acted like they were the perfect match for Stacy and hoped Stacy would not open her mouth. But out of nowhere, and to everyone's surprise, Stacy decided to speak up and interrupt the judge. This could not be good. The break was over, and the judge ordered everyone to return to the courtroom. Stacy sighed and followed her caseworker quietly back to their seats. But not before giving her foster parents one final confident look to make them even more nervous. They had no idea what Stacy was about to do. Stacy's caseworker noticed her piercingly looking at her foster parents and tugged on Stacy's arm. "What is that look? Don't do something you'll regret later, Stacy. This is a lovely family. You don't want to screw this up." But her caseworker had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. The judge started the trial and was in the middle of a sentence when Stacy suddenly stood up and interrupted him. "I have something to say, and it's very important." The judge was astonished by this rude interruption but let Stacy speak. This isn't the lovely family everyone seemed to believe. But what was the secret that would lead to the arrest of her foster father? Somewhere in New York lived a young girl named Stacy. Stacy had a difficult childhood, bouncing from foster place to foster place. She longed for a permanent place to call home and a family to call her own. But despite her hope, the foster homes she was placed in were never quite what she had envisioned. She had been to different foster homes but never stayed more than a few weeks. She felt very alone and had very few friends. Just one girl named Mia and Stacy's caseworker Jim were the only steady things in her life. She knew whatever happened, she could always rely on them. Stacy's caseworker Jim had watched Stacy bounce from house to house. She always tried to do her best, but it just never seemed to work. Finally, there were only a few foster families left, and the Berkling family was one of them. Jim really thought that family would be the one, but it's not always as it seems. One day, Stacy was placed in yet another foster home, but this one was different from the others. The Berkling family seemed perfect at first glance, with 2 loving foster parents, a foster brother, and a comfortable home. But as time passed, Stacy began to notice strange things about her foster father. Her foster father's strange behavior was the first sign to Stacy that there was something wrong with this family. She did a little digging and unraveled a big scary secret. There was something very wrong about this family, and no one from the outside had any idea. Not until Stacy decided it was enough, at least. At first, Stacy didn't know what to do. She was scared to speak up, but she also knew she didn't want to stay with this family forever. Luckily for Stacy, her trial period was coming to an end, and she knew they all had to go to court very soon. There, she would reveal his secret. All Stacy had to do was push through for a couple more days, but it was harder than she thought. Her foster brother gave her a hard time and would often pick on her, and her foster mother wasn't as kind as she portrayed to be too. But Stacy's suffering would soon come to an end. The day of the court hearing was filled with tension for Stacy. She woke up early, her stomach churning with nerves as she got dressed and prepared for the day ahead. She and her foster family had to go to court separately, so Stacy got picked up early by her caseworker. Jim could sense Stacy's nervousness but didn't say anything. He knew how gut-wrenching times like these were for kids, so he wanted to make the ride as calm as possible. As she arrived at the court, she could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She walked into the courtroom on her own and saw her foster parents sitting at the front, looking confident and self-assured. Stacy's eyes darted around the room, taking in the judge, the lawyers, and the other people present. She felt a wave of anxiety wash over her, but she pushed it aside and reminded herself why she was there. She had to fight for her future and had to be strong. She didn't want to speak up just for herself. She wanted these people off the foster care system so no other child would be placed with them ever again. The hearing began, and Stacy's foster parents spoke first, praising their parenting skills and how much they loved and cared for Stacy. They even showed pictures of the family together, and a video of them doing fun activities, trying to persuade the judge that they were the perfect family for her. Stacy listened in silence, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. She knew that they weren't the loving family they claimed to be and hoped the judge would see through their lies. But as the trial continued, it became clear to Stacy that the judge was blindsided by their behavior. There wasn't much Stacy could do in this situation. Even though she wasn't raised right like any other decent girl, she knew you shouldn't interrupt someone as they were speaking. So she had to think about something else to do. Something that would make them pause the trial, if only for a few minutes. So Stacy did what she knew best: act. She always had to act kind and nice around families she didn't even know. So how hard could it be to act like you were getting sick? Stacy began by putting her hand on her stomach and frowning at the judge. She then began to breathe heavier and heavier. During the short break, everyone had to wait in the hall. And when Stacy's parents thought no one was looking, they headed over to Stacy to give her some advice. "I know what you're doing, but it won't work," her foster mother said. But Stacy had something else in mind. She hadn't told her foster parents yet that she knew about their secrets. But now that they were trying to intimidate her, Stacy responded with a well-thought-out response. "Well, I wouldn't be so sure about that. You never know what I might say." This was just vague enough to keep her foster parents on edge for the rest of the trial, and that was just how Stacy wanted them. All she needed was one slip up in front of the judge, and her story would become more believable. Because Stacy knew damn well she wouldn't be taken seriously otherwise. Stacy's caseworker walked over to Stacy as her foster parents walked away and asked what that was about. "Oh, nothing," Stacy said, but Jim could see there was more to it. "Don't do something you'll regret later, Stacy. This is a lovely family. You don't want to screw this up." Stacy wanted to make a snarky remark, but just as she opened her mouth, someone called for the trial to continue. So Stacy sighed and followed her caseworker quietly back to their seats, but not before giving her foster parents one final confident look to make them even more nervous. And her tactic worked. Stacy's parents seemed to have lost their confidence and now looked more on edge than before. Stacy sat in the courtroom, her heart pounding as she glanced at her foster parents. She knew the truth about them and couldn't stay silent. Her caseworker noticed her tension and whispered, "Don't do something you'll regret." But Stacy had made up her mind. As the judge continued, discussing things Stacy barely understood, she seized the moment. Ignoring her caseworker's attempts to stop her, she stood. "I have something to say, and it's very important." The courtroom fell silent. The judge looked at her, surprised, then nodded. "This isn't the lovely family everyone seems to believe." A tense pause followed. Then the judge stood. "Walk with me." He led Stacy and her caseworker to a private room, closed the blinds, and sat down. "That's a serious allegation," he said. Stacy met his gaze. "I wouldn't lie. I'm in danger if I stay with them." The judge frowned. "Why do you say that?" "Do you promise to believe me?" Stacy asked. "I can't promise that, but I will investigate," he replied. Stacy hesitated, then asked to speak to Jim, her caseworker, alone. Once the judge left, she shared her suspicions. Jim looked skeptical. "Are you sure?" "Foster families are carefully vetted." "I'm telling the truth," she insisted, frustrated by his doubt. Overcome with anger, she ran out of the room, past the judge's calls to stop. She had to get proof. Tears streamed down her face as she sprinted home. Bursting through the door, she startled her foster brother. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Getting proof," she replied. She ran upstairs, knowing exactly where to look. Moments later, she had it. Clutching the evidence, she raced back to the courtroom. The guard stopped her. "What are you doing here, little girl?" "I have a court hearing," she said, tugging free and dashing inside. She burst through the doors just as the judge was announcing her disappearance. Jim rushed to her. I have the evidence," she panted. Her foster parents shot up, their faces pale. "What do you mean, Stacy? Didn't you enjoy being with us?" her foster mother asked sweetly. But Stacy ignored her, turning to the judge. "I want everyone to hear." She stood tall and faced the room. "This isn't the loving family they pretend to be." Stacy explained how they first seemed kind, offering security. But soon she noticed her foster father's suspicious behavior. "He acts innocent, but looks can be deceiving. That man is a bank robber." Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge's face remained unreadable. "That's a serious accusation, Stacy. You said you had proof? Show me." She approached the bench and pulled a crumpled $100 bill from her pocket. "This is from one of his big black bags full of money." The judge examined it and handed it to an officer, whispering something. Then, turning sharply, he declared, "Arrest this man!" Stacy's foster father protested, but the judge was firm. Officers took him away as Stacy watched, a relieved smile on her face. "What will happen to him?" she asked. "The money will be tested for fingerprints and traced to its bank. If you're wrong, he'll go free and you'll be in trouble." But Stacy wasn't wrong. Investigators uncovered the truth. Her foster father was part of a notorious criminal gang. He was convicted, and his family was banned from fostering again. That night, Stacy stayed with her caseworker, knowing she'd never return to that house. Soon, she was placed with a new family, one that truly cared for her. At last, she had found her forever home.